Alright, this is my second attempt today to broadcast. The first one, I didn't get it recorded. It broadcast live, everything was online, I could hear it, but I forgot to record it. So I wanted to put this on YouTube and a couple of other channels for podcast. And this one's an important one to me. This one is all about, the anger, the righteous anger of Christ versus the unrighteous anger of man. Christ had perfect agape love, but that does not mean he was peace pot microdot. He wasn't just some pacifist hippie. He let his anger get the best of him a few times. I myself have done the same thing, and I've apologized because my anger wasn't righteous. My anger was emotional and personal. And it was true, it was sincere, but I should have delivered it with more love, with the love that 1 Corinthians 13 talks about. I did not do that, and I feel terrible, but today's topic is about Christ's anger versus, human anger. I want to first start with John 2:13 through 25. This is when Jesus entered the temple, saw all the merchants, and strung together a whip and started whipping the animals out of the temple and shooing the people off and overturning their money tables, their vendor tables, and scattering money everywhere. He lost it. I think that it was intentional and I think that it was sincere, but the anger boiled over in him, and it happens to the best of us. So this is just an actor, a voice actor, replaying the scene in John 2.
An actor plays the part of Jesus, and though no actor is worthy of such a role, it has been done so that we may understand and benefit from the life of Jesus.
It was almost time for the Passover festival, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. There in the temple, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and pigeons, and also the money changers sitting at their tables. He made a whip from cords and drove all the animals out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He overturned the tables of the money changers and scattered their coins. And he ordered those who sold pigeons,
take them out of here! Stop making my father's house a marketplace!
His disciples remembered that the scripture says, "My devotion to your house, O God, burns in me like a fire." The Jewish authorities came back at him with a question.
What miracle can you perform to show us that you have the right to do this?
Tear down this temple, and in 3 days I will build it again.
Are you going to build it again in 3 days?
It has taken 46 years to build this temple.
But the temple Jesus was speaking about was his body. So when he was raised from death, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and what Jesus had said. While Jesus was in Jerusalem during the Passover festival, many believed in him as they saw the miracles he performed. But Jesus did not trust himself to them because he knew them all. There was no need for anyone to tell him about them because he himself knew what was in their hearts.
All right, so I think if we take into context what the Bible says about anger, I would say most of them, maybe 90% of the verses are against anger and preach, being slow to anger, slow to wrath, slow to rebuke, slow to, response. But there are times when there is need for righteous anger. I'm not a Joseph Smith fan, but if you even look at Joseph Smith or Brigham Young, they had some pretty angry moments themselves. So I've been discussing this with classmates about the suicide issue in Utah, about Utah using double the national average of prescription drugs, both opioids and SSRI antidepressant type of drugs, about Utah being #1 for suicide for kids ages 11 to 17, and suicide being the leading cause of death for that age in Utah, and #5 overall in the states for suicide. So much to be concerned about, and it seems like nobody wants to talk about it. There's a article, I believe it's from 2006 in the Deseret News, called "The Deadly Taboo." I can't remember how it was phrased, but it's basically how Utahns like to avoid the topic of suicide, and that's why it's an unspoken of event. Like somebody commits suicide, and more often than not, their parents, their loved ones will not tell anybody or refuse to tell most people how they died. So these people, at the end of their life, they're ready to make a statement. They go and shoot themselves and often leave a note, and then their family will hide the note and all evidence that it was a suicide and tell everybody that it was a mistake. Unless it's unavoidable, like, a gunshot wound, but a lot of these overdoses never get known for what they are. And there is so much of that. There's been over 11,800 overdoses in Utah since 2016, and that was according to stats from a couple months back. Oh, and by the way, today is March 30th, 2019. This is live, but I had to start a little early. I have a date with my kids, and I need to get on with that, so I can't be here until after dark, like usual. So, yes, 3:10 p.m. Hawaiian time, Disruptarian Radio, disruptarian.com. Let me just play you a little bit about why Jesus overturned the tables. This is according to a pastor, Craig something. He announces himself at the beginning of this. So let's just do that.
Dr. Craig Evans is with us all this week as we approach Easter weekend. And it's so helpful to have this distinguished professor of New Testament from Acadia Divinity College walk us through the historical context of Jesus' final week before his death and resurrection. So Dr. Evans, yesterday we talked about the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem and the significance of that. And then after he arrived in Jerusalem, he did something quite unusual. I'm just going to read a portion of that from Mark chapter 11, starting at verse 15. So they came to Jerusalem. Then Jesus went into the temple and began to drive out all those who bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry wares through the temple. Then he taught, saying to them, "Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of thieves?" And the scribes and chief priests heard it and sought how they might destroy him, for they feared him, because all the people were astonished at his teaching. Now give us a little bit of the context of what's happening here and why Jesus would do something like that.
Well, first of all, you need to know that when he went into the temple, he's in the temple precincts. And the temple precincts would be like several football fields. It's a very large area. So he's not actually in the temple building, the sanctuary. Don't think of that. Don't think of it as though he went inside somebody's church and started pushing
desecrating things.
No, no. And so out in this large plaza, there were sellers of animals and money changers and so on, because you couldn't bring pagan coins with inappropriate images or something right into the precincts and say, I want to buy an animal that qualifies for a very holy sacrifice. And so there were rules about this. Well, what apparently had happened was the animal trade had become very lucrative, and the area where the Gentiles were allowed to congregate and pray, because they...
First, I want to just show that this describes the environment that the temple was in at the time. It was a very one-minded thing that they were doing. It was about animal sacrifices. That was the job of the priesthood. So this illustrates not only what we could see at the temple and what it looked like at a day-to-day basis, what their functions were, you know, what it was all about, but also what the priesthood was about, why they had the temple, why they had the priesthood to begin with. It was all about Numbers chapter 3 verse 10, about the animal sacrifices done only by the descendants of Aaron, by Aaron's sons. This is also in Exodus 22. You can read a little bit more about the format of the priesthood, and then also Hebrews 7, chapter 7 verse 21 through 35, and also Hebrews chapter 8 verse 4, about the functions of the priesthood. You know, it just gives us clarity of what we could see at a temple ceremony back in Jesus's day, what it was all about, and then what he was concerned about, because he hadn't fulfilled the prophecies yet. He hadn't fulfilled the law. After fulfilling the prophecies, you know, the blood atonement and whatnot, which was his primary mission, was to fulfill that prophecy and give grace in place of the law. That's Hebrews 7. But then we see what Jesus is concerned about, and he's talking about, you know, what's to come, but also what the purpose is now. And he's like, you don't turn my Father's house into a den of thieves. And as he whips them, turns over their money changing tables, and, you know, goes kind of wild and let his anger kind of get the best of him. Well, what I see is this format. Well, let me play the rest of what he has to say, and then I'm going to talk about a comparable thing, a little anecdote.
Couldn't get real close to the sanctuary the way Jewish men could. And so Gentile men are further away. And so I think Jesus saw that the commercial interests and perhaps some other corrupt practices were encroaching on an area where the Gentiles could congregate and pray. And he saw that as a terrible testimony. For Jesus, the faith of Israel, belief in one God, the God of Abraham and the patriarchs, a covenant God, not this polytheism, Greco-Roman gods and all the rest of that, but the one true God, the creator of the world. What a testimony, and with it, what a responsibility, a spiritual lighthouse to the world. And that's the passage he quotes from Isaiah 56. This house called after God's name is to be a house of prayer for all nations. And you've turned it into a commercial enterprise that's perhaps corrupt on the edges. You have transformed what should be this grand and glorious testimony to the world into a cave of robbers. That's literally what the text says. It's often translated den of thieves or something like that, but the Greek text literally says a cave of robbers. It's a phrase right out of Jeremiah chapter 7. And no ruling priest wants to hear anybody talking about Jeremiah 7. That passage talked about a corrupt and oppressive priesthood that was doomed. And so Jesus, in effect, is warning them, you keep this up, and what happened to the first temple long ago, which led to destruction, it's going to happen to you too. And that's why they're angry. But they can't act against Jesus because the people love it. And they don't know what to do. So it's a very interesting and important passage. I'm glad we're talking about it.
So the last verse that I read there is, yeah, they're starting to now plot. How can we get rid of this guy but they're afraid of all the people that have just, hailed him as Messiah, really, as he entered Jerusalem, and so it's makes for some interesting drama heading up to Good Friday.
So that's why Jesus did this, what it was about, what the arena that we saw or we visually imagined during that play where Jesus went in with his whip and started whipping people out of the temple and telling them that they have turned God's house into a marketplace. So this is what I want to talk about with Proposition 2, what I am so angry about recently. And I admit my anger. I'm not trying to pretend I'm not angry. I have been very angry about what happened with Proposition 2 in Utah, where the Utah legislature, which is 91 LDS members and 11 non-LDS members, met with the LDS Church over this policy, over this referendum, or this citizens initiative. They said, well, we don't want it. And the LDS Church from the pulpit was telling people not to vote for it before it passed. Well, it passed anyway, with a majority vote. The people spoke. Well, the Mormon Church didn't like that. They threw a little temper tantrum, went to the legislature, said, nope, you got to change this. So they had a little backup plan in play, and they passed HB 3001, which circumvented the entire law that the people passed. Because, and only one reason that this is because it is, and the reason it is they require pharmacists to distribute a federally illegal product. Now, what is the difference with somebody like me doing that compared to a pharmacist? Well, I don't have a federally licensed DEA number or whatever that I have to associate with every drug I distribute. Every controlled substance that I distribute, if I'm a pharmacist, has to have a DEA label on it. Someone like me doesn't have to register with the DEA. The 10th Amendment is the umbrella that I use to use cannabis because the law passed that says I can. I don't have to worry about the federal government because the 10th Amendment trumps that. It restrains the federal government, right? So the LDS Church overrides the will of the people, treats them like children, and says, no, you can't have medical cannabis because there's no way a pharmacist is ever going to risk their license, risk their education to, get either prison time or discipline of some sort by distributing a federally illegal product as they are registered with the DEA, which considers marijuana a federally illegal product. So they're going to lose their license or something. It's too much of a threat. I can't imagine this ever happening. They say it might happen by spring of 2020. Yeah, I don't know. But they also removed the option for home grows. They also removed conditions like intractable pain. Other various conditions were removed. Some were added. But it ended up being worse. Without home grow, people have to go to these licensed pharmacies, and no other state has to do this, where there's a licensed pharmacist in a licensed pharmacy. And there's only going to be 5 retail outlets in the whole state, so you've got to drive how many ever dozens or, hundreds of miles to get to one of these places that rich people get access to, but nobody else. So it's not going to be like a mom and pop store. It's going to be very wealthy people with $250,000 of liquid assets floating around in their accounts to insure this bond that the state requires for them to open. And then they're going to have to pay very high prices. They're going to have blister packs for flour, which is going to cause a ton of waste. And there's so many problems with it that even if they do get licensed pharmacists to break federal law, or at least to violate their license requirements, I don't think this is going to be good. People are still going to be going to the black market. They'll be going to Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, just right across the border. No reason for them to deal with all the crazy market that the LDS Church created. But I still think that violates the Constitution, the First Amendment, where there is a separation of church and state clause there that says the Congress cannot favor any particular religion over another. So religion can't dictate law as it has. It's dictated law in this state, in the state of Utah. Shouldn't be that way, and it should be challenged in court, and I believe that I heard that it is challenged in court right now. The Supreme Court is hearing the veracity and the viability of this HB 3001, and hopefully they look into the inappropriate behavior of the LDS Church and the legislature, who are mostly LDS, collaborating together against the will of the people. Now, the people represent, 40% roughly non-LDS and 60% LDS. And even if it was all 100% LDS or all 100% non-LDS, it doesn't matter. The will of the people spoke, and the LDS Church and the LDS Church state legislature overrode them. And that violates the Constitution. I have a problem with that. So venting helps me. I mean, if I bottle stuff up, I explode, and I don't do a good job of, being Christ-like. I don't do a good job of delivering my message or being productive. I hate to be angry, but over this, I did get angry over Proposition 2. So we'll be talking about this on Tuesday at 4:20 p.m. Hawaiian time on UtahPirateRadio.com. This will be the same topic we talk about for a long time. I'm going to be covering this as it goes through court, as Utah responds. Hopefully people aren't so cowardice that they won't speak out about this. I know people are angry. I see people's responses on Facebook. Hopefully they aren't cowards and they just keep it to themselves. I hope they speak out. The LDS Church is flat wrong here, and there should be consequences. If they're going to act like a corporate entity or a political entity, they should be taxed like a corporate entity or a political entity. On this City Creek Mall that costs billions of dollars, they don't pay federal income tax. This is a non-profit organization. Let me play that for you. This City Creek thing. First, I'm going to play you Sean from Heart of the Matter, and he's going to describe some interesting features about the City Creek Mall, and then I'm going to play a little commercial and President Monson, the prophet of the Mormon Church, Monson. So let me just play this one, and then I'll get to the next in just a minute.
Not there. Listen, Russell W., a regular viewer, forwarded this information to us. From KUTV, Salt Lake City, the arm of the LDS Church, which served as, quote, master developer, elaborate shopping, residential, and office complex, has federal tax-exempt status. CCRI, the City Creek Reserve, Inc., revealed that profit corporation. As such, CCRI spokesman Dale Bills noted the company pays property and sales tax, but it appears CCRI may not pay federal income tax. If CCRI makes money, it goes to the LDS Church. That's in the article. It continues, a week ago, Dee Brewer, a representative for mega shopping center developer Taubman Centers, Inc., said Taubman, quote, owns and operates the retail components of City Creek, but that ownership may not be what you think. In the end, all ownership reverts back to the LDS Church. Referring to the shopping center, it goes back in 30 years. In referring to the condos, condo buyers will forfeit ownership of that condo years, and it will go back to the LDS Church. A CPA named Anderson says that, a realtor, commercial realtor says, at the end of the day, CCRI, which is the Mormon Church, owns everything.
So the reason why I draw that as a parallel to John chapter 2 is because this City Creek Mall, this huge multi-billion-dollar entity, is directly across the street from the temple. So they've got a whole bunch of money changers, commissioned by, funded by the LDS Church, selling gifts and goods right out in front of the temple. And then, of course, inside the temple, they sell, or in the visitor center, if you're qualified, if you have a temple recommend, you can purchase very expensive underwear that you're required to wear in the temple. So this is very much just like John 2 or Mark 11 or, the many accounts of what happened there at the temple with Jesus. And I wanted to draw that as a parallel before I get into this medical marijuana topic a little bit more. So let me just play what I told you about. This is Thomas S. Monson talking about money and finances and spiritual obligations, but then they kind of dub him in when the LDS Church dedicates the City Creek Mall, this multi-billion-dollar shopping center, and they dub him in his words after playing this commercial, or during playing this commercial, which was pretty funny. So let's see if I can hit the right one here. I got a new deck. It's called Let's Go Shopping. This was a intro to that, or a commercial for the City Creek Mall back in 2012.
Not there. Listen, Russell W., a regular viewer, forwarded.
Oh, sorry.
We've been spending our moral capital with the same reckless abandon that we've been spending our financial capital. There are large parts of the world where religion is a thing of the past, and there is no counter voice to the culture of buy it, spend it, wear it, flaunt it, because you're worth it.
1, 2, 3, let's go shopping!
Buy it, spend it, wear it, flaunt it, because you're worth it. Buy it, spend it, wear it, flaunt it, because you're worth it. Buy it, spend it, wear it, flaunt it, 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 because you're worth it.
All right. And so why I draw this as a parallel is because with Proposition 2, you see that the LDS Church owns companies that distribute drugs like Marinol. Marinol is a synthetic marijuana that they would be able to sell at these pharmacies. They would not be able to sell cannabis buds or things that are on the Federal Controlled Substances Act schedule. The Controlled Substances Act, both in Utah and in the federal government, say marijuana is a Schedule I drug. And it is prohibited. It has no medical value, and it says that it is highly addictive. So it ranks above cocaine and meth and LSD. Cannabis is a Schedule I, which is the most restrictive schedule. Cocaine and meth and LSD are Schedule II. No, I'm sorry, LSD is Schedule I too, but cocaine and meth, crystal meth, are Schedule II. They're lower than marijuana in restriction on a federal and a state level. So what's going to happen is the LDS Church is going to have a huge market lining up to buy their very expensive synthetic pharmaceutical grade Marinol that has had many, many consequences, deaths and near deaths and people getting sick. It's terrible stuff. This doesn't happen with marijuana. Marijuana was made perfectly by God. Doesn't need to be altered, doesn't need to be refined or added to or synthesized. It's just perfect the way it is. It's the anointing oil of Moses, as spoke about in the Bible in Exodus 30, 22 and 23. The ingredient fragrant cane translates from the word cannabosum in Hebrew. And the word cannabosum in Hebrew has been translated by many rabbis and scholars as cannabis, marijuana, hemp. So the anointing oil of Moses had 9 pounds of cannabis in it. The christening oil of Jesus did as well. So, I mean, for the LDS Church to control this so heavily shows that they're not interested in the safety of people or the comfort of people or the compassion involved here. They're into making a buck. They want pharmaceuticals to take the place of natural, God-given herbs. that are very effective for cancer, for seizures, for all the things that it talked about in that Proposition 2 and more. And they know it. That's why it's passed in 30 states. And it's been great for revenue. It's been great for the budget of each state. It's been great for reducing crime and DUIs and fatalities on the highway. Look at Washington, Colorado, Oregon, Alaska. Their economies have changed drastically, and their safety on the roads has changed drastically for the better. So let me just... I had one more thing. I wanted to talk about how to control anger in a godly way or in a Christ-like way. I have a terrible way of presenting myself sometimes. I really wish that when I'm very, very angry, I had a little helper to control my tongue or something. Proposition 2 thing has made me very angry, and I think it's because of what happened to my brother Justin when he was a kid, and what happened to me before that. Like, my brother Justin tried and succeeded to kill himself. I tried and failed, but it happened in the same way both times that the suicide attempt, was attempted. My mom, trying to save face and not be exposed as having a problem or a problem in the family, to be more of a pristine and well put together family. She wanted to get rid of all illegal drugs like marijuana because they had such a stigma. She had no problem buying my 15-year-old brother, cigarettes, tobacco. And I think she still does to this day. He still lives with her. But she had no problem buying him tobacco so that he wasn't stealing it from the store. She didn't want that kind of reputation as having a family full of thieves. So she bought him and gave him cigarettes at a very early age. But when my other brother, my youngest brother, started getting into cannabis and she found out, like me, she did this to me too after I left for Seattle, but like me, she called the cops and said, hey, please go investigate these kids. They're selling marijuana to my son. My mom did that to me, so a couple of my friends got calls from the police. Apparently, after I left for Seattle, when I got back, they told me about it. And then a few years later, my little brother in 2002 had my mom calling the cops on him, on his friends anyway, for marijuana, to kind of get him out of that crowd. And then when all of his friends wouldn't talk to him, he got very depressed and very suicidal. So she went and got him some meds, just like she did me, some antidepressants. And he took a bunch and overdosed on them. And apparently it was intentional. After 10 years, I had to go and get a death certificate because I never believed the story. She always said it was an accident. It was an intentional overdose. Those meds, just like I told her, make things worse. She didn't listen to me, so she holds this grudge on me and thinks that I'm responsible because at one time I smoked weed with my brother years and years before. In 2002, I had given up marijuana completely, alcohol, tobacco. I had stayed away from all of that, and I was a dedicated Christian. And in fact, he brought marijuana to me and he said, hey, you smoke this with me, you roll this up. I took it, I thought about it, and the next day I gave it back. And I said, I don't want to be a bad influence. I'm supposed to be, a better lead here. I'm, a better leader. And I gave it back to him, never told anybody. And it was about 4 or 5 weeks later, after my mom had got him the medication, I think it was about 3 weeks after she got him medicated, that he killed himself. But about 5 weeks after that incident where he gave me a marijuana bud and I didn't smoke it with him. So that's one of my biggest regrets in life, is not listening to my heart and smoking it with him. Helping him relieve some of his stress and just having somebody to blow off steam with. I should have given him that. I should have smoked weed with him. I absolutely should have. And if I could do it over again, that's one regret I have that I would change. I would have smoked weed with my little brother. But now I don't talk to my mother. She's got this resistance. I mean, she actually went and got married in the temple to my father. And after that, I just haven't talked to her. It's been a few times, very, very few, maybe 3 or 4, since they got married in the temple. But the LDS Church, to me, is very controlling, very destructive, both on a micro level with personal relationships, but on a macro level, like with politics, where they trample all over the First Amendment, which we get that definition of separation of church and state from. That in the Federalist Papers, but the First Amendment actually says Congress can't favor any particular religion. So they've done that. They broke the Constitution. They broke the guidelines, the laws in the Constitution and the First Amendment. And they should be punished for that. They should be tried in court and, have a hearing on this and look at the evidence and see what happens. I think that this is wrong, and they should be restrained from meddling with politics unless they, want to change their dynamic. If they just want to change over to a political entity, instead of an entity that says they're charitable, that is nonprofit, maybe that's fine. I mean, go be a corporate entity or whatever. But don't use all this tithing and charitable money to force a political agenda that hurts people. That's my request. Dallin Oaks, one of the apostles, said a couple years back, in fact, I'll give you a link to this. It's going to be in the description as well. He bragged that the LDS Church, gives around $40 million a year to charitable purposes. Most of those charitable purposes are like LDS welfare and the Deseret Industries, so it circles back to them anyway. But from an organization that has $40 billion at least in assets, that's only 0.1% of, all of their assets, or something of that nature. $40 million to $40 billion is about 0.1%. Every year they take in about $7 billion of tithing, so that's about, 0. I don't know what that is, 0.5 of 7 billion. It's not a significant amount. To even be called a charitable organization, when so little is given compared to what is taken in. And that's why I find them so uncharitable with cannabis. It's because it's all about making profit. It's all about selling their Marinol that they own stock in. It's all about keeping people strung out on prescriptions, deadly prescriptions that have very significant side effects. Marijuana has no LD50 rating. You can't overdose on it. You could smoke a room full of it in one night and you'd wake up the next morning. You might be hungry, you might tear up a pizza, you might be munchy, but you're not going to be dead. You do that in any significant amount with any of those pills, even a handful, even 5, you could die. So I just think that it's very uncompassionate of the LDS Church to be so greedy and be asking people for so much tithing when they give out so little in charity. And then they circumvent the laws like this, the people's initiatives. It's turning into tyranny. And that's why they have so many suicides in Utah. They treat their voters like children. They ignore the will of the people. They trample on people's rights. Don't you think that'd make somebody depressed? They use double the national average of prescription medications. Children ages 11 to 17 die from suicide more than anything. Utah is number 1 for teen suicide and number 5 for overall suicide. And there's so many other problems. Domestic abuse, child abuse, bankruptcies are number 1 in Utah. All of that, number 1. For very hideous, things in society, to be number 1 for many of those things, it's really consequential. It's going to make them lose more and more and more members. And the way they treat people in society. Look up this. This will tell you why I think that Utah's people, not even just Mormons, but just the way that their culture works because of the Mormons, but other people, non-Mormons too, treat each other badly. They have such high expectations in the LDS Church. They have so few ways of blowing off steam, or, even if they write a book, like the September 7. My lawyer, Paul Toscano, wrote a book about Mormonism. A couple of other historians wrote books about Mormonism. And the September 6 in 2004, in September, 6 authors, well-accredited, well-published, bestsellers, wrote books who were Mormons about the Mormon Church, and they were excommunicated. Now, rewind back to the 1800s, back to when Brigham Young was governor of Utah, and then just in any search engine, Google, Yahoo, whatever, look up Brigham Young blood atonement. You'll find it right from their scriptures, right from the words of the prophet in the Journal of Discourses or in their newspaper, Times and Seasons. You'll see this law of blood atonement, which was basically just murder. You oppose the LDS Church? Well, you better have your blood atoned for you. So they kill the guy. You are going to leave the Mormon Church and renounce your membership. Oh, well, you're going to lose out on all your blessings unless somebody kills you and your blood atones for your sin of apostasy. Oh, you had an extramarital affair. Well, they better kill you. It happened. Hundreds and hundreds of people died from blood atonement in Utah all the way up until the 1900s. So now they just use other forms of separation, and what they feel is distance makes the heart grow fonder. So when they push people away, for whatever reason, maybe they're apostate, maybe they're looking into other churches, maybe they, had sex before marriage, drank a beer, whatever. Now they ostracize them so that when they are separated from the crowd, that distance makes their heart grow fonder of their heritage and of their family and of their place of origin. So the distance is supposed to make the heart grow fonder. So they have many methods of doing that. They have peer pressure, no official doctrine or direction, just peer pressure, just how it's supposed to be, just how people are raised. You look down on people who smoke or whose parents smoke and drink and party. You want to push those people away. That's just how their society works. But then they also have disfellowshipment and excommunication. And I've had many, many friends have that kind of court where they're deciding whether excommunication or disfellowshipment. And, that makes you lose everything you've ever loved. For the most part, you're separated. So a lot of times people will lose their jobs, their callings, their place in the community, their wives, their husbands, whatever. Those are serious consequences. They're just social hazing, but they are consequential and they are real. So blood atonement went away, but other forms of ostracization haven't. And that's why Utah is so depressed, as well as the way the LDS Church overrides the will of the people and trumps their citizens' initiatives with a LDS calculated House bill. I can't even talk. I'm absolutely furious right now. So I'm going to call this quits today. I'm going to play this again at 4:20 p.m. Sorry there was no call-ins today, but I had to record this early. It is broadcasting live, and one of the upcoming shows will do WhatsApp. So download WhatsApp. Our phone number is on the website at www.disruptarian.com. This is Talk Story Saturday. Ryan coming at you from Hawaii. Mahalo.